Project cost management. Now, here we're going to talk about money. Everyone loves money. And projects need money. And this is the specific place that we'll talk about the money that it takes for projects to exist, to fulfill themselves. Remember early on, I talked about how corporate assets are important, and that's what we were worried about as project managers. Here we're talking about project costs. So money is right there. And we need to understand how we do processes around those monies, how we do our job, because part of being a project manager is handling the money of the group you're working with, the organization, the company, the government. Here are 4 processes. We plan it. Plan cost management. We estimate costs, meaning we figure out how much it's going to cost. Pardon me, I didn't read it right. What does it say? What does it say? It says we estimate costs. Now, remember what I said. We're not saying we told you what it will cost. A project manager, a project team, a group developing projects estimates the costs of that project to the best of their ability, according to the information they have. And this particular situation, this environment, is one of the things that causes projects to fail when the cost overruns of a project happen. And I'm trying to make this moderately humorous so that we understand that when we talk about being a project manager and certifying, that the estimating of the costs is important. It's hugely important, but it's estimating, not defining, not reporting. We determine the budget. Well, and here's part of it, and this is good. We determine the budget. How much do we think we need to spend? Now, part of project management takes care of that estimates to budget. And I fully understand that. For all of you out there, you need to understand that there are differences. Within our corporate and organizational structures, we need to understand how this works. I have been in situations where budgets are not known, costs are not known. No, pardon me. They're known. They're not known by the project manager. The project manager is simply there for other reasons. So when we get in this particular area of cost management, and we're talking about a certification that is global, we need to breathe and understand that there will be times that our certification will not allow us to have access to certain things. And that's okay. We may not know as much as we need to. And this is not either a bad thing, a criminal thing, nor is it something that is in often a situation. It just means that's how organizations work. We may not be there for a lot of the management, determining of the budget, nor of the last thing, which is controlling the costs. Now, realize that happens. Let me share something for you with someone that has been here a few years. This is something we will control the costs as much as is allowed. And the companies are extremely good, but it's how things are structured that you need to understand. As a project manager, you should strive to plan, estimate, determine, and control the costs. That is your job. Remember what I said early. You are in charge of the triple constraint. What is part of that triangle that you have guardianship over? Cost. The amount of money that you are the guardian of. You are the steward of that money. You are the person who feels like if I spend that money, I should realize that scope. And I should do it in that time frame. So that's what this is about. My preamble was for people who want to not feel compelled to let the people who should be in control or have influence on it have influence. And I truly believe that project managers are very good people with money. Now let's talk about cost management. The first piece of cost management, surprise, surprise, we're going to plan it. We're going to plan cost management. And we have inputs. We have the project management plan. We have the project charter. We're trying to say, look, as we go through this whole process of what is in the governance documentation, what it takes for you to be a PMP certified project manager, you're always going to hit these same things. Every time you turn around, project management plan, project charter, you're going to have the enterprise environmental factors. Are you shocked? I'm not. The organizational process assets, all of these elements are part of what you're talking about. Now, your tools and techniques for cost management, you need your expert judgment. Expert judgment. Your analytic techniques, your meetings. And you come up with a cost management plan. Now, what is a cost management plan? Is it a budget? No. It's how you manage the finances that are put in your place. in your hands, in your control. That's what we're talking about. You use your expert judgment, analytic techniques, and meetings to take this information and make a cost management plan. How should the budget be handled? How should the monies be distributed? You may have a procurement situation, vendors that you have to deal with. You may have many vendors. Understanding from the organizational process assets, enterprise environmental factors, all of these things drive you to understanding how you deal with money, how you will personally be dealing with it. And I see some of you out there going, why are you so passionate about this? And I'll tell you, it's because at the end of this lecture series, when you get ready to have to take the test, and I've taught you everything, hopefully, that you know about it. Well, I'll teach you what I know that you can use. There's a part about professional responsibility. And I don't want you to hit that and go, oh, and I gotta be responsible? Yeah, you do. It's part of it. If you're certified, you're responsible. And they can absolutely get rid of you if you're not. And frankly, if you're not responsible, then they should get rid of you. So if what you're trying to do here is just to get a check mark and move forward without being responsible, this is a place we need to take and go, here it is. You're dealing with money. And you may be given great responsibility for corporate assets. Not all of us are. Us being project managers, because I am one. So you need to understand that. What our purpose here is to help you understand this. But I will raise my flag occasionally. Those of you who understand. There are lots of costs to projects, direct costs. There are the costs that are spent only on the project work. So what does that mean? I'm a project manager. I'm building a project. If I'm building a project to shoot a video, then what are only on the project? I don't know. What do I need for the video? Well, direct costs are things like the information, the people, etc. for a video. Another example. Direct costs. If I'm dealing with a application, what direct costs for the project only on the project are needed? Well, those direct costs may be for the actual work on the project. So it's the people and the information needed to build that application. So maybe you need specific people in there for that application. Or it can be for the people who are regular that you can bill out for that application. They can be developers. They could be training. They could be testing. They could be project managers. But if you're building, say, a point of sale system, you might have hundreds of people that are directly related to a version of the application. Direct costs are directed to the project, not necessarily to the company. Remember when I talked about many lectures ago about things that were project-oriented and operational-oriented? Project-oriented is to the project. Operational-oriented are things that are not directly related to a project. These are types of costs when I talk about direct costs that are spent only on project work. Other things may or may not be. You have other rules you have to talk about. And here's one. Indirect is not directly related but allocated. Allocated project costs are, for instance, if you're working with in a situation where you have a designer and that designer is not fully allocated to you, not fully allocated. Remember, we still haven't gone through resources, so, bear with me. Maybe they work for your project for 6 weeks for 50% of their time. They're not allocated. The cost may be split between you, the project manager, the project. Right now we're talking they're linked at the hip. And someone else. Well, what would that someone else be? Could be another project, could be operational. Remember our rules. You have projects that are specific. You have operational, keeping the lights on. They could be keeping the lights on. It's not for us to decide, it's for us to understand that there are a difference. There is a difference. Excuse my English. There is a difference. And we need to be aware of it. We need to be mindful that organizations work in different ways. They have different situations. And I've known project managers that got hit in the head with costs that had nothing to do with them or the project. So the types of costs have a purpose. For the certification, understanding the difference is simple. Only for the project, not directly for the project. It may be allocated to the project, but they may be costs to the project. So direct is direct, only on the project. Indirect is not directly to the project, but allocated. But realize, if these costs are talked about by your project, they better touch your project in some way, because that's where people get in trouble. You can't charge somebody who's spending 40 hours as a programmer for a different project to your project and call them indirect, and it makes sense. nor is it, in most cases, legal. Types of costs is fixed. It's consistent throughout the life cycle of the project. And fixed cost. What's a fixed cost? What? Take a moment. Think about it. When I go home at night, my apartment, my home, what's fixed? What do I have to pay every month? All the time. Fixed. Mortgage? Okay. Yeah. Consistent throughout the project life cycle, no matter the project activity. It's fixed. First, let's look. What's variable? It fluctuates. Fluctuates with project activity. So fixed costs and fluctuate. What fluctuates within our general life? What do I see as a cost? I mean, if you're paying the bills, and if you're paying the bills and it fluctuates, what kind of things fluctuate? So, what's a project? We'll go back to the beginning. Do projects last forever? No. No, they don't. They're unique. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And somebody told you that. So if a project cost that we're looking at that's consistent throughout the life cycle of a project, it must be fixed, and we can count on it happening every single cycle. I say it that way because, is it monthly? Is it biannually? Is it annually? It can be a cycle, but it's fixed. Every year we pay, name a company, a certain amount of money because of a license, because we have people on board. Variable, it's variable, which means I have 6 programmers this month, 4 next, 2 the following. I can drop them off. It varies depending on our need for the service provided. Need for the service provided. So it's different. Different projects have different fixed and variable costs, but fixed and variable is a very well-known concept in business. Most businesses know this, and they would laugh at you if you didn't. And I wouldn't, because I've been a project manager. I know, I breathe, but it's something out there. There are types of monies that are spent. Cost-based selection techniques. Now, this is where we're going to look at why projects happen. And this is important because typically a project has to have a reason to be there. We talked about it earlier. We talked about being a project that brought value to the organization. A project that had something that was offering a cost value. A project that was bringing you a customer. Or a project that may be keeping people out of jail, meaning it's a compliance issue. You have to be trying to do something that is positive to the cash flow. So if you're a privately owned company that the private people can make money, if you're a publicly owned, that the stockholders own it, and if you're a government entity, you have to make sure that everyone stays in the right way and that you can make money. Never underestimate the fact of making money. So, here we have return on investment. You want the largest number or percentage. If someone looks at you and says, what is your return on investment? It should be a big number, big percentage, big. Bigger's better in return on investment. If you look at the internal rate of return, it should be the largest percentage. Bigger is better. Net present value. It should look good, largest number, based on the years already factored in. The net present value is something that is calculated regularly. So you have to figure out, is this good or bad? Is this, and good and bad is probably not the right words. Is this a positive thing at our current situation? That may sound like I'm hedging things, but it's not. And I like using those words because most of us hedge things. We look at things and we go, what is, let's just figure and twist and where am I at now and where am I going? Breathe. Net present value. NPV. Look at that as a cost-based technique. That's the largest number with the years already factored in. Generally speaking, it already is. But you have to confirm what they're talking about, because not everybody is as honest as you and I. The benefit to cost ratio. Well, what's the benefit to the cost that I have to give? So if I can make $10 when I spend $1, that looks good. But you have to understand the ratios. Unfortunately, bettors understand that, but there are few in our profession. So we have opportunity cost. Now, an opportunity cost is really looking at bypassing one opportunity for another. So if you decide to do one thing and not another, most project managers do not get involved with this, but they need to be aware. It's an awareness. They need to see how businesses are affecting their transactions, how they're doing business, how they're choosing projects, because the project that you may be doing may be affected by another project. Payback period and future value. Payback period is simply the amount of time that you pay back the investment. it's a simple transaction. And you need to be aware of that as a project manager because the payback and period is important to understanding the value of your individual project. The future value is related because we look at this formula. And yes, memorize the formula, put it on your list as things you need to be certified. And understand, we don't use this as project managers regularly. It's a standard formula, and I've seen it many times before. But you're looking at the present value and the future value as it is related to a certain interest rate. And that's what this is trying to calculate, and does. It does calculate it. But it's in terms of project management, it is not something we deal with regularly. But you should know it for your test. Here's the great example. All of this particular calculations comes down here. Present value. Again, we're looking at present value and future value. Here's the formula. Sunk cost. Oh, what you've already spent. It's unrecoverable. If you've already spent it, you can't get it back. So sunk cost is a understandable term. How does this relate to project management? Is that you need to understand how much money has been spent. How much of the corporate assets have been spent. So you understand this particular calculation. Depreciation is another term to be understanding, and it's about the devaluing of an asset because of tax purposes. We all who have done taxes should know a certain amount about depreciation. And if you don't, look it up. As a project manager, you need to know that certain assets that are bought as part of a project or are on site can depreciate. And that depreciation is an important part of how you deal with your project. Total cost of ownership. This is the process of understanding and examining all the costs associated with the project that you're doing, all its deliverables, both the products and service once they've been delivered. It's something that all project managers should understand because it's part of how you bring things forward and communicate them to the owners of those projects, those products, those services that you bring out. Now is estimating cost. Estimating it. Figuring out what it costs us. What have we talked about? We've talked about what we're going to do. what. WBS is the best example of that. Work breakdown structure. The things, the nouns, the things we're going to do. We've talked about how we're going to do it. We've talked about some of the structure of the costs, of how much it will cost. But we don't know how to estimate the cost yet until we get to here. The inputs are the cost management plan, the resource management plan, the scope baseline, which says exactly what it is we're trying to accomplish. What is it we're delivering? The project schedule, which we should have in hand, which says we're going to do it in this time frame. The risk register. We haven't talked risk yet, but we should be dealing with it. Remember, we're not linear. Some of the areas that we talk about here are not part of a linear process. If we put it in a linear process, it would be complicated and confusing. So we're dealing with the risk register. We probably have talked about risk. Remember my story, 2 hands. Lessons learned, risk. We deal with risk early on. The enterprise environmental factors and the organizational process assets are standard inputs into this process. We have expert judgment and analogous estimating. We're going to talk about estimating, which is important because we're trying to estimate the costs. These will not be different or unusual as we look at the differences between estimating costs and schedules. We have parametric estimating, bottom-up estimating. We have 3-point estimating. You remember that one. Same thing, different data points. We have reserve analysis, which is about risk, again. We have the cost of quality. Now, the cost of quality is actually something that we will discuss greatly when we talk about quality management. The cost of quality. How do you make something not better? That's not quality. In project management, quality is about delivering what you agreed to deliver. That's quality. And project management software we use in this estimating process, as well as vendor bid analysis. If you have vendors, you have bids, you analyze it, and you figure out what is the best. And group decision-making techniques, again, we use the group, the people we're actually working with, to actually help us make decisions about it. Our outputs are our activity cost estimates, our actual estimates. We're getting the real information with cost estimates about what the activities will cost. We get a basis. So how much will it cost and why. Basis is about why. What did you base that on? What did you think about? What are the parameters? What are the pieces that you base it on? We update our documents for the project. Cost estimating tools. First, we use our expert judgment. That is our go-to thing. What you have between your ears is very important. Remember that. Our expert judgment and getting others who have expertise in a specific area is important. We also use things like analogous estimating. That's looking at projects that you've done before or others have done before and see what they have spent on it. What is their estimate for cost in that particular project? And we can use that as sort of an idea. It gives us something to go to. Or you can look at parametric. Parametric estimating is about taking the pieces and estimating each of them, going to look at how much each piece of the car would take to know what the total car would be. Looking at a project, how much do I need to spend for the requirements gathering, for the project management, for the development, the design, the testing, etc. Everything is broken into pieces and wrapped up in some type of formula or algorithm, and it helps you. This refers to a more manual process than some of the other estimating processes we'll see later. We have bottom up. This is actually going even more detailed than parametric because we're looking at it as granular as we can and getting very, very specific numbers from vendors, from others in our organization, and we're trying to drive this into a very specific set of numbers that when we look at it at the lowest level and build up, we get a very specific answer. It's time consuming. It's very accurate, but it's not always worth the time to get the accuracy, which is why it's not done all the time. We have 3-point estimating. With cost, we're looking at the high, the low, and right in the middle, the most likely. And we divide those 3 quantities added together by 3. It gives us a point of reference. It may be good, it may be bad. It really depends on those 3 points and how they're gathered, who gives the information, what the expertise that was used in gathering those 3 points. The reserve analysis is specific to risk management, and we'll talk about project risk management in a later session. But we do analysis during risk where we actually put quantities onto the risk. We say how many days and how much money a risk would incur based on estimates. So risk analysis is put into this as a way of understanding we have to have that part of our project, the risk part of our project, understood and taken into account before we move into a solid cost budget estimate. Cost of quality is one of those estimating tools that we use that says, how much do we do quality? How many checks? What are the balances? Are we trying to work quality in from the first day, or is it something we just wait to the end and we check on things and reject things at the end? We can have absolute quality checks and balances throughout. It just depends on how much we want to pay for them. And there's a lot of work in quality, and we'll talk about this in detail, the tools that we use in quality management, and that is also a later part. But we note it here because when you're estimating the price of the project, you need to understand that quality is a component of that. We have project management software that's actually designed to take individual pieces and build out a cost for the project. I've used several of these types of tools myself, and some of them work very well. Most of them that I've found are significantly accurate are the ones that allow you to both do the algorithm that they build, meaning you add numbers into it and it comes up with a number, but it also lets you do a check. And does this make sense to you? For instance, one particular software that I used tried to say that it was always based on specific numbers of developer hours. And the developer hours for a particular application development project would stream to the testers and the project management and the analysts and et cetera, to all different bodies. And so it was a development-centric view. And what we had to do is we had to basically idiot check it, meaning in the nicest way that it didn't always account for the hours and the time and the cost of certain resources that were necessary no matter what resources. No matter what we did, we needed certain costs to be covered. So I love project management software, but like any tool, it is limited and needs to be checked and rechecked. We have vendor bid analysis, which we use as a tool to estimate, because when we look at how vendors bid things, we can see how much things are going to cost. If we look at the industry, how much are vendors bidding for certain items, both in terms of how much we have to pay to them for services, for products, etc. And it can be everything from generic, where we get industry standard information that is published on a regular basis. So we know in the last 5 years what people are having to pay for certain services, certain products, computers, whatever. But the vendor bid analysis is here to make sure that we look at what people are paying. You can make it very personal by using information that you gather yourself. And if you have the time and energy, and if you're spending that much money, you might want to go out, do a request for information to the population, vendor population out there, and get information that's specific to the product that you're trying to create or the service you're trying to create. In doing this, you get specific information that you can roll into the estimate. Now, it's not necessary, and it does take time. Time is money. So if you're trying to bring something to the marketplace quickly, going with an RFI, a request for information, will delay you by necessity. But a lot of large companies, large organizations will use this as a way of getting vendor bid analysis done. Now, the vendors are not guaranteeing the price they offer, but they are saying this is what we think based on what you've told me, and it gives you information, not guarantees. But it's a good source for estimating your costs. And again, we have group decision-making techniques that we use in our cost evaluation. It's bringing the experts together and saying, what do you think? It can be formal, it can be facilitated, it can be very structured. It can be using different types of survey tools to ask different questions and specific to costs that people know because they do it every day. You can involve accounting, HR, technical services. It really depends on your project. It makes sense to bring these people together, if for no other reason, to validate and get buy-in to the estimates that you're giving. Again, it's time-consuming, it can be costly, and you have to make good choices for your individual project. It's a tool. Use it if and when it's needed. So, we have our estimating task, cost, and duration. Here's a way of looking at one way of trying to solve this problem and look at the issues of dealing with cost, duration, and how it can be complicated. This is really a case study, if you will. A case study in looking at how different resources and different cost points and durations are looked at or can be looked at in your project. So here we have 3 team members who are being considered for a specific assignment. And your subject matter expert, that's where your expert opinion comes in, estimates the task will take 90 effort hours, meaning 90 hours for someone who has average productivity. So an average person will take 90 hours. This is typical project management because we look at that. We don't look at the superstar or the below average. We want to look at what's the average person take. That's our first kind of, okay, let's get an estimate here if the average Joe or Sally or whoever is doing whatever you're doing. Nailing boards, programming a computer, doing testing. That doesn't matter. This works every time in terms of the philosophy we're talking about. You look at average productivity. Then you take the following matrix for the individuals. So we're taking this from a average, what could happen averagely, and we're looking at the availability, productivity, and unit cost of the team members. So we're looking at the specifics. We're going from a general case to a specific case where the actual individual productivity, availability, are they there? And the unit cost, what actually does it cost me for this person, is taken into account. So here, we are looking at a design prototype that we have Ted and Lynn and Jose. Ted has a productivity of 60%. What does that mean? That means he is a 60% producer. If 100 is average, what you want, whatever that is in your environment, Ted's below. His availability is 50%, and his cost is $45. Understand, the cost of resources is generally associated with their productivity. If you're better, you get paid more, generally. Here we have Lynn. She's 120% provider with a availability of 40% and an $80 an hour cost. And Jose, he's right on the 100% productivity, 40% availability, and $60 an hour. Now, we do the math. We do the math. And we see the different labor costs and durations for the different resources. If this sounds complicated, it's really not. It can be put together fairly easily. The question here is what's most important. One of the things we haven't talked about yet, and I'll breach it right here, is the idea that the triple constraint, scope, cost, schedule, the triple constraint really needs to have a priority put around it. At some point as you are putting together your project, whether it's in the project charter stage or the project planning stage, when you're putting your project management plan together, or when you hit something like this, where you're looking at the balancing of labor costs and duration of effort together in the real world, you will be forced to answer the question of priority, what's most important. And it is a project by project, with the caveat that we all are working within organizations, and each organization will have its opinion. Is it better to be cheaper to have the product or to have it on time? And every product, every project, every service that we create with projects has the possibility of moving to different prioritization of that triple constraint. Here we are estimating, but we're looking at it in such a detailed level that it helps us understand this quandary. And it really is a problem, because no one wants to say that it's more important to be on time than it is to be cheap, or it's more important to be cheap than to be on time, or it's more important to get the product out than anything else. No one likes that. It's an uncomfortable situation to make that assertion, no matter which of the three elements is the most important. We all, in different conversations, will say a different thing. But as a project manager, this is why we document things and we look at things and we try and ask the right questions. Because for us to build the project and make it successful, we have to have communication of that kind of prioritization, and we need to document it and get agreement of it. But here, it's not as clean cut as we would like. But it gives us data that we can make a decision on, because we've made and gathered expert opinions. Now, are we to assume moving forward that the predictions of productivity that we noted, 60% for Ted, 120% for Lynn, 100% for Jose, are going to hold? Are we going to assume that their availability of 50%, 40%, and 40% for the time period we've told them will hold? What if those factors don't? Now you're facing exactly what we deal with every day in project management. We make estimates on our best guess, our best available information. everything we can get, all the best expert opinions and tools and techniques implemented in the right way. But we're doing real things in real time with real people. And everything doesn't always work out the way it was estimated. That doesn't mean you shouldn't estimate. It simply means that you need to be diligent in your estimates and understanding when change occurs, when things don't work out or things are changing, and you need to be able to react efficiently and effectively to that. That's project management. And when you look at your certification and how you're being judged in a test, that's what they're looking for. Your ability to take the challenges of project management and be able to manage them based on the criteria that you are given. In your workplace, it will be criteria that you discern. On the test, and when you're certifying, it will be the criteria that is offered on top of the common sense and common practices that are typical. So understanding from a organizational point of view what those things are is a good mindset to go as you move forward and think about the certification process of being a project manager. We're going to determine a budget. Our inputs here, we have our cost management plan, we have our scope baseline, we have our activity cost estimates, we have our basis of estimates, our project schedule. So we're understanding what the scope is, what our estimates are, what our basis for the estimates. So we know our justification. We see our schedule that we've put together, our resource calendars, which help us understand when the resources are available, when they are available, and who they are. So it's important to understand that. We see a risk register. Now, we haven't talked risk yet. We talk about it later, but it will exist by this time because we're already creating risk. Remember early lecture, 2 pieces of paper either side of me. Risk, lessons learned. Risk, lessons learned. That is the beginning of your risk register. So you'll have some idea there. We'll talk about the detail that a lot of people will use and in a very good and successful way of dealing and managing risk. We need to do that. Here, it assumes it exists. But remember, all these documents are somewhat in process at any given time. We lock things down. And we will try and do that when we determine the budget, because the budget is one of those locked down kind of things we have to do. So we also have agreements. If you have contractual agreements with vendors or with other organizations, you need to have that in place before you determine your final budget. Organizational process assets are also a part. We need to understand how we do things with our organization. Our tools are cost aggregation. Now, what is cost aggregation? New word. I don't think I've said aggregation to this group. So what's an aggregate? An aggregate is the bringing together of separate pieces together. When we have a cost aggregation, we're talking about bringing the cost of the different pieces together. So we aggregate the costs. We look at the reserve analysis, again, risk management. We have a tool of our expert judgment. So we're still looking at it and bringing the right people in to make judgments on determining the budget. We have our historical judgment. What's happened in the past? What's happened so that we understand historically what we've done so that we don't repeat mistakes and so that we can learn from our mistakes and make better judgments. If there's any funding limit reconciliation, at certain times when we create a budget, we have to look at if there are things that we need to deal with, fiscal year ends that will cause problems, or simply that you have a project running between fiscal years and there's some kind of reconciliation that you have to figure out, and it may limit how you're looking at it in this particular budget. Our outputs, process, we have inputs, we have the tools and techniques. Outputs is the cost baseline. That is your budget. That's when you say, yes, we can do it, everything you said, and we can do it for this amount of money. Now, what it is we do, when it is we do, and how much we do it for, the triple constraint, are exceptionally important and do work off each other. As said, you change one, you can affect the others. That has to be taken into account. That's why we work them a lot of times in tandem. We don't announce a schedule without having a budget. Being given a forced budget will affect a delivery date and the scope of a project. Affect, may not change it, may be a factor in the evolution of developing a product or service that your project is evolved into. But it needs to be taken into account. Our project funding requirements, it may be that to do a specific project, you know it's going to take $1 million. There's a requirement. We may need to spend money. Some organizations have budgeting types that talk about we need to spend capital dollars, or in the software business, software capitalization. Accountants will go into great detail about monies they need to either spend or not spend for specific projects, and it can affect the way we budget a specific project. I had a colleague who worked in the phone company and a long time ago who held on to budget dollars that his particular group had a hold of. And by the end of the fiscal year, he had people that were not very happy with him holding on to those that amount of money because they wanted to spend it. They were fully capable of spending it. But he knew he had a capital purchase at the end of the fiscal year, and that capital purchase would take the rest of his budget, and he could buy more for his dollars at the end of the fiscal year than he could at the beginning. Because of the vendor that he had, he knew they would decrease the price he had to pay at the end of the fiscal year. So it was a funding requirement that he manipulated, and he had to justify it. And it was for a specific project that he was dealing with. Again, we have outputs that include our project document updates. Anything that we would update typically, we need to look at, address, and update as appropriate. Now we have cost range. When we're doing estimations, we do them in different periods of time. And sometimes we're much more confident in our estimates than others. Within the methodology that we're talking about, they look at it in two different cost ranges. The first is a rough order of magnitude. And you've probably heard about this. It's a ROM. It's between 25 and 75% plus or minus, 25 to 75. And it's a rough order of magnitude, meaning you want to get a clue about what it's going to cost. Is it going to be $1 million or $1 billion? Is it going to be $1 million or $6 million? Or is it going to be 100,000? What is the rough order? And you use your techniques, your tools, the things we've talked about to come up with that. So you see where not taking a lot of time up front may be good if the first thing we need to do is come up with a rough order of magnitude. And here it is. Second piece. We want to come up at when we get to the point of launching the project and getting it really going. And where that is different for different organizations. But the idea is once you've decided to do something, a project, you're solving a corporate problem, cost, customer, compliance. You need to do it. It's decided to be done. When you get ready to launch it forward, you need a definitive estimate. That's a -5 to 10%. That means you can increase your budget by 10% without having to do huge amounts of justification. You'll have to justify it. It'll have to be based on something. You can decrease it as much as 5%. Now, some people look at the decreasing of a budget as being such a positive thing. Everyone's always asking for money back at the end of the fiscal year. Can we get money back? The analogy that I told you about where I had someone who had money they spent at the end of their fiscal year, but it sat there for a long time and had people asking him about it. He spent it for a good reason and got good value for the money he spent. But the reason they were kept asking about it is that money sitting in an account does not help a business, an organization be profitable. Businesses are profitable by spending their assets and making money on them. What does that mean? Simply put, if I spend money to buy a 5-cent pen and sell it for $5, I've made a huge profit. That's what organizations are about, making the profit. So you don't want corporate assets, money in this case, sitting and not working for you. So when you spend the money and how you spend the money is important. And you need to understand that as a project manager, that your spend rate is going to be watched and understood. It's also, you need to understand that they will decrease it. They want you to be as better on your estimate here, on your definitive or control estimate. They want you to be more, they'll give you more money if you need it. Then they'll let you slide off of it. When I was a very junior project manager, I didn't understand this. I thought if I could give money back to the company, I would be thought of as a wonderful employee, a great project manager. But the reality is, the closer you come to your budget, the better you justify the decisions that were made originally. That's why we deal with the situation where at the end of our fiscal year, We have people who spend their entire budgets rather than giving money back because, in part, they're justifying that expenditure, that commitment of the monies to begin with. In projects, it's no different. Here, we have a specific goal, a product, a service that's been committed to by the organization, and we're trying to get it done. So the idea of the having the estimates be very correct at this point is very much the point. It's very important to people. So now we're controlling costs. This process of controlling cost is very, very important. Everyone likes to watch the money. We have some specific things that we do. The inputs that we have are our project management plan, of course. We have our project funding requirements. We also have our work performance data that comes into this because we're controlling things now. We're in that monitoring and controlling area of project management. So we are working with people and we're looking at how they're performing. Who's doing what? How are they doing? How well are they spending money? How efficient is their work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All those parameters we are looking at. We also have our organizational process assets, and this is huge in the controlling of costs because costs are not looked at by project. Mostly they're rolled up into program, portfolio, organization. It's a matter of looking at the big picture and you're a piece of it. And as a project manager, your organizational process assets, the things they give you to be able to do this, or they require you to use, part of the governance of the organization, part of how you do your work or are expected to do it, is a huge piece of controlling the costs. We use tools such as earned value management. And we'll talk a lot about earned value management. It's a huge part of the certification that we're talking about here. Huge part, understanding the tools there. It's not used in all organizations, not always at the project management level, but it is used sometimes higher up. And I'll give you some examples when we get into the details, and we'll take some time on this. So don't feel like I'm glossing over earned value management. It's a big part of certification. It's a big skill set to know and understand how to use it. We also use forecasting. You're controlling costs, so you're forecasting. When are we going to spend the money? How do we know that? How do we forecast how much money is coming out of my bank account? We do this individually every month. When is my mortgage? When is my water to be paid? When is my phone to be paid? My internet? My, name a parameter. I was going to say my child's tuition, but, you know what I mean. Those are things that we deal with, and we can forecast when those things are going to hit the specific bank account that we want them to be pulled from. The same thing happens with projects. Projects are about spending money to get a result. And here is a way of doing it, of spending the money and controlling those costs. We do forecasting. There is a part of earned value management, we pull it out here, a to-complete performance index. And it gives you a way of looking at where am I now? Where and how do I get to the end? and it's an index that we can look at. We can create a calculation if we have all the data, caveat, if we have all the data, and we can create a to complete. The project will be complete if we perform at a certain level. We'll get into detail on this, but it's a good tool to use. And it's one of those earned value management tools that you might be able to create the right environment without getting too detailed. Some of the tools in earned value management, and I will repeat this a couple of times for you, are difficult to get all the parties working together and get the data straight. And when you have the right data and it is consistent, it's very powerful. We have it here because it's an important piece of controlling costs. It's used in the whole idea of our compliance and doing our certification. It is a question that's asked. Because remember that when you are certifying, our worlds are more perfect in the certification than they are ever in our real life. So they will create, and we create these scenarios, these work studies that have this as being a valid tool that we'll use. We have performance reviews as a tool. We review the performance of people to see how they're spending money, when they're spending money, vendors spending money. Are they doing it too quickly? Are we getting higher expense reports than we're expecting from vendors that are supplying talent? Those kinds of things. We also have some software, project management software out there that can help with the control of costs. Some of the standard things are just controlling the number of hours, understanding. We're not controlling. Let me take a step back. This is part of monitoring and controlling costs. And we can't say no after costs have been incurred. We can look at trends and patterns and we can try and guide. Part of what a project manager does is to try and understand those trends and be able to help manipulate the situation in a positive way, guide it in a positive way. So here, with the software, hopefully we're getting good information quickly so it can be actionable quickly. Hear that word? Quickly. If I'm looking at things 6 months behind, 3 months behind, even a month behind can be difficult because of why. Why would a month-old data be difficult for a project manager with an ongoing project? Think about it. Why would any data that's a month old be difficult to a project manager? Because the project didn't stop. And I can't go back a month and fix a problem that may existed a month ago, but the effects of that problem, the result of that problem or problems are being felt now. You can't go back. So the relevance of the data has a time stamp on it. It needs to be known as quickly as possible so it can be acted on as quickly as possible. If you know you're spending too much money on your phone bill, don't you want to know that as soon as you are spending too much money on your phone bill? We don't do minutes much as we used to in the wireless game or whatever. Even long distance minutes are almost non-existent. But don't you want to know when you hit that limit as quickly as possible? Why? Because you want to fix the behavior behind the problem, whatever that is. With projects and controlling costs, that's what you want to try and do. Some software helps you with that, some doesn't. Some systems help you with that, and some don't. But knowing what you can expect will allow you to set the expectations of your reaction time in controlling costs. Can you control costs outside of 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? There are well-documented case studies of government projects that got to the end and said, well, we spent all the money, but we have nothing. And it would have been, as a citizen of the country, it would have been nice if we actually knew that earlier on than when the vendor got to the end of it or the team got to the end of the project's money and said, we're out of money, we don't have a product. And if you think I'm kidding you, I'm not. You can look it up. I will not tell names, but you can look it up. And most of us who have worked for years understand that can happen. The big cases make the headlines and hit, your Google feed and such. But the small cases happen all the time where we make a mistake in controlling costs on projects. And it ends up costing the companies and costing careers at times. It's not an insignificant piece of the business, which is why I emphasize it so heavily at this point. Project management has a heavy piece in this. We have the insight and the expert judgment and the knowledge and hopefully the visibility. And that's what I strive to teach in understanding this and knowing it. And that's just the tools and techniques. The output from controlling this, we have reserve analysis. Risk analysis comes a little later. Risk management comes a little later. I forget, we keep putting this in. And you see what I did. That's right, we have risk. We'll get to it. It's behind, it should be in front of me. And that's why I put it on the wall. Because it's easy to go, oh, that's right, that's a technique I should be using in controlling costs as risk. It's there. We'll talk about it. Now we have the outputs of controlling costs. We have the work performance information. Over on the other side, on the inputs, we had the data. Here we have the information. What is the difference between work performance data and work performance information? Work performance data has not been organized to make it useful or actionable. Work performance information has been. So I may know that a certain vendor is overspending their allotted travel expenditure by 10%. That may be a piece of data inputted into controlling the costs of my project. But the information side may be that, and we asked them to show up twice as often as they were originally thought to. So the fact that they are bumping that piece of our budget makes sense. So it's not a pure they're overspending. It's we're over asking for on-site visits, for instance. So you need to have the outputs be the intelligence, not the raw data. The raw data is the raw data. It's an input. Remember, we're looking at this whole process in a methodology that's mechanical. It's very modernal. It's very modern. It's not Zen at all. And we'll talk about that. Actually, we will talk about, project management in a Zen type of mentality. But that's later. Here, we have a structure, inputs, process it with tools, outputs, very mechanical. That's a very modern concept. Didn't happen 1,000 years ago. Yes, we had some machines, but we didn't express ourselves that way. So here, I want to point out that we get data, we work them through our tools, and we get information. Information is actionable. Information is intelligent. It gives you more than the raw data. Think about it. If you see your child do something you don't want them to do, they have a grape in their hand and you know they're not supposed to have grapes. And you go, why do you have that grape? You have noted a behavior and an event. But do you have information yet? Do you? You see they have a grape. You assume a behavior until you confirm the behavior. Did they go and get the grape or the candy bar? Or did they get that from another party or person or for a reason that you don't know about because you don't have the full picture? The whole idea of controlling costs, in this case that we're talking about, is understanding as much information as you can. We gather the data. We use the tools. We come up with information. In this case, we're talking about work performance. So it's specific to people, which is why I'm personalizing this. It's people. It's controlling cost related to people. We have cost forecasts that come out of this, meaning if we keep working the way we are, the forecast for the future will be XYZ. What is the most used way of saying forecast for most people? There's two things. If you're on the stock market or dealing with financial markets, forecasts are used there. Agreed. But most of us, even if we are invested heavily in the stock markets and look at it, don't look at it as much as we look at our weather.com or weather.gov or weather.org or whatever. Our weather forecast, our local, what is it going to rain on my head today? Is it going to affect my commute? Weather forecasts. So what am I saying here? This is cost forecasts that we're talking about, and I'm talking weather forecasts. My point is we look at data. On the weather side, they try and predict what's going to happen and forecast it. With projects, we do it with costs. How are we spending money now, and what can I forecast for the future? So I understand the instead of the weather conditions in a day, week, month, year, I know the financial conditions in a day, week, month, year. It's very important to, in this type of environment, when you're dealing with projects and you're controlling your cost, to be able to have some idea of prediction of what are you going to spend. And this is not rocket science. A lot of this is laid out. Every one of us should have and may or may not have the idea of how much money I have to spend next month personally to stay afloat. My mortgage, my utilities, my child's tuition. There are a lot of different factors, but they should be fairly known. With projects, we do the same thing. What vendors are coming in? What vendors are we leaving? What type of capital expenses, buying equipment, do we have to do? Those should be fairly well noted. Now, I'm looking at a couple of folks out there who say, I don't touch the finances of my projects. I never know. They don't let me. Whether you're a contractor or employee, it happens where this piece of the puzzle, the budget that we're talking about, and the monies that flow through are not readily available to all entities in a project, even the project manager at times. So just breathe. We're assuming you do. We have to, because project management and the way that you understand it completely is to have that knowledge, have that visibility. You have to have the expertise of knowing how to control costs to be certified, to be successful in a lot of environments. I agree completely with those of you who are looking at me and going, I don't see the numbers. But you need to understand what the numbers mean. Even if in a specific project or organization, you're not expected to manage them, you need to know what they should look like or have a clue so you can ask the right questions of the people that do see these things. Because I guarantee, whether or not you know you're over budget, at some point, every project manager that I've ever known who has a project that's over budget is held accountable for their over budgetness. So the fact that you don't see all of these factors that I may be telling you, and not all of them exist in all environments, I grant you, but we're looking at cost forecasts, things like this that are the outputs of controlling your cost. If you don't do this currently and you don't see it happening because it's not part of your environment, it's not part of your organization, it's okay, and it doesn't devalue the work you're doing, it just makes your work perhaps more difficult. And if we look at how to get your certification, it's assumed if you're the project manager and the charter says that you are the project manager and you are authorized, all of this is assumed to be available to you. So for the sake of getting certified, assume you have these skills in every scenario that's put in front of you. And these are the tools. And these are the outputs for controlling your costs, including change requests. Again, change happens. You may discover something. I may need a budget increase or a budget decrease. I mean, it happens. You can make a lot of people's life very nice by decreasing your budget. So don't look at that as an insignificant kind of thing. It can be good. But you have change requests. And of course, you have your project management plan updates because you're controlling cost. If things change, you update the project management plan. And realize a lot of these project plan and project document plan, I mean, what some people do is they have a page of noting. It's kind of like a log sheet of noted updates. If I update something, I have a line item in that log. Think about it. Most of us understand this conceptually because we either do this or see this. So if you have an update, if you don't have an update, there's an expectation. One of the things I don't get, but I get on different levels. This is, once you hear it, you'll know. A document that has a page and it has a line on it that says this page was intentionally left blank. And you're like, well, why did you even print, but that's the kind of thing I'm talking about here with updates. Sometimes you have updates and you simply put, as of this date, first of the month, end of the month, no updates of this document. Why do you do that? Why do they say this page was left blank on purpose? It's so no one will think that there should be something on it. If you do that with your updates, it lets people know that there shouldn't have been an update. There was no update because we had nothing to update. But they don't wonder about it. Well, they haven't touched this document in 6 months. Wonder if anything's changed. Well, if you've gone in every month and you've had a line item saying nothing's changed as of this date, signed by project manager, you have that coverage. And it may sound silly to some people, and it may sound extravagant to others, and it may sound weird in any way. But it's a way of keeping up with things and not wasting time and corporate assets if it's a process that takes you little time to do, but allows other people not to waste time. I mean, think of it this way, and I'll give you my example from my life. I went to the store to get coffee one morning. I went to the store because we were out of coffee. I couldn't make coffee for myself or for my wife. And I came back, and my wife was sitting in bed, and she was a little upset. And she asked me, "Where did you go?" And I said, "Well, I went out to get coffee so I could make you coffee. I mean, you were asleep. It was 6 a.m. I'm sorry." And she was like, "All you need to do is tell me, just whisper in my ear, I'm running out to get coffee. I'll be back in 5 minutes. I worried when I woke up and I didn't see you and I couldn't find you." The same thing happens in our projects. Not just here when we're talking about controlling costs or updating documents, but other places. It takes a shorter amount of corporate energy if we communicate clear and readily. And we're always working on it. We're always trying to find those things that we can do to clearly communicate things. Here we're trying to understand money, which to a lot of us is a lot of numbers and a lot of confusion. Many of us are very comfortable with it, but we're controlling the costs here, and it's important to understand some of the detail. There's our documents. Other documents get updated as well. And of course, we have our organizational process assets updated. are always possible of changing how we actually do things in the organization. So we have to take that into account and update as appropriate.